What I find is a really helpful distinction that I bring in the book is the difference between a position and a stand. You know, we've seen passions arise in communities for a variety of reasons in the last couple of years. And this is where I think the idea of a position versus stand really helps. A position is against something. And it's quite easy to identify that fire that ignites when we feel very, very strongly against something. But a stand is for something, and that's very different. So the example I use is we've got a narrow country lane by where we live into our village, and there's only enough width in that road for one car to pass at a time. And sometimes you'll have two cars, one coming each way, and they meet bumper to bumper or fender to fender. And they each take up a position against the other. And that position looks like, no, you back up. My journey is more important than yours, or you were going too fast. Yeah, we've all been there. And what happens is that the positions become more and more entrenched as they become stronger against one another. But then occasionally in that situation where the two cars meet fender to fender, one of them will reverse back up to a passing place because that driver has got a stand. And that stand is for being courteous on the road. But here's the interesting thing. The other person who had that position, that immediately dissolves as they can carry on their journey, because a position can only exist if there is a counter position.
This is the Play Your Position podcast, where we huddle up, call the plays, and inspire you to run your ball into the end zone. Are you ready to score more game-winning touchdowns in your life, business, and career? Then listen up, because it's game time, baby. Now, here's your host, Mary Lou Kaiser.
Hello, Team PYP. Mary Lou Kaiser here. Welcome to another episode of the Play Your Position podcast, where we dive into a topic that never gets old. I'm talking about leadership. I'm talking about being a full human being and showing up to this game called life we are all playing with the best tools, the best insights, and listening to conversations like the one you are about to hear with my guest, Peter Docker, who is coming to us today from the beautiful country of England. Peter, are you ready for kickoff?
Absolutely, Mary Lou. I'm delighted to be here and excited for our conversation.
So am I. So team, here are some things that I know about Peter. He is a teacher, he is a speaker, and he is an author. And his mission in life right now is to help others navigate the challenge of leadership. And you guys know, we've been talking about leadership here for almost 8 years. It continues to challenge us and is one of the best challenges for us to face. His latest book, Leading from the Jumpseat, delivers the message that leadership is about lifting people up and giving them the space they need so that when the time is right, they can take the lead. He's also the co-author of a book you might be familiar with called Find Your Why by Simon Sinek. And he's also a formerly founding igniter at Simon Sinek Inc. Peter draws on his 25-year career in the Royal Air Force and over 14 years spent partnering with businesses around the world to inspire others to lead from the jump seat. And I'm going to leave it at that, Peter, because you have so much to share with us today. Right out of the gate, my first question is, when did you get the call to leadership? How old were you? Do you remember a specific moment, or was it a more gradual unfolding as you grew up?
Well, I think, Mary Lou, like a lot of things in life, you don't realize these crossroads until perhaps later in your life. And certainly, reflecting back, I guess one of the first choices I made, which was an act of leadership, was when, well, good heavens, it was 40 years ago, if not to the day, to the month at least, when I went off to college, university. And I chose to study a couple of subjects which I knew nothing about. But I decided to go that route because I thought at the time they gave me the greatest opportunity to earn a good living and support my parents who had, both lost their jobs and, were a bit hard up. So, when I look back, that was an act of leadership, because when we choose to lead our own lives, there are always going to be people who say, oh, I wouldn't go in that direction. I wouldn't do that. But you move forward because of a conviction you have and an underlying commitment, even if you can't put it into words. And in fact, I have that again 2 years into my 4-year course at university, when something else happened in the world, which was the Falkland Islands were invaded, and the Falkland Islands down in the South Atlantic are a British territory. And it was not about the politics for me. I was just incensed that someone was trying to impose their regime, their thoughts on other people. And that triggered in me a really big driver, which is around mutual respect. And I decided at that early age that I wanted to be a part of an organization that could help people who couldn't help themselves. And so I left mid-university course, and joined the Royal Air Force as a pilot in the hope that that organization in the future could help others who were in similar positions. So, when you're asking me about when was the sort of aha moments around a call to leadership, I think it crept up upon me. It's only on reflection that I can see these crossroads where I chose to go in one direction rather than another, that was actually an act of leadership, leading myself, which perhaps helped me, give me a foundation to lead others later on in life.
Yes. It's so fascinating how everyone's story is different. Some people do have that moment when they just knew. And then others like yourself, where you, in hindsight, you can see, yes, that was the turning point for me. And, fast forward to today, you've recently launched your book. And one of the beliefs that you have is that everyone is capable of accomplishing extraordinary things. And as leaders of our lives, as leaders in our homes, as parents, for those of us who've chosen to have children, as leaders in our communities, and then at work, what are you seeing out there right now that is giving people the biggest challenge in leadership?
I think actually that can be summed up in one word: fear. Everything that we do in life that's important to us, everything is driven by one of two things. It's either driven by fear or it's driven by love. Now, I'll come back to that word love, because certainly in a business context, it makes people a little bit jittery. So I think we can spend a little bit more time on that in a moment. But let's first of all deal with fear, because fear is a fundamental reaction. And fear kicks in when we feel our life is in danger. And that's a good thing. If we step out into the road and there's a car coming, fear will have us jump back into safety. But the problem is that fear is also, activated when we sense that our livelihood, our status, or our reputation is under threat. And then fear emerges as, it comes across as, sometimes we forget to think about others. It's all about self. In fact, one of the biggest things that kicks in is ego, which is Greek for I. And we focus on ourselves rather than those around us. We start to, perhaps get angry would be another fear-driven response. Or we start to see the world as a place of scarcity and competition where only one can win and others have to lose, and we've got to be the one to win. Or it might affect us in another way. Fear could show up as timidity, where we take so much of a step back, we no longer are involved. And none of these things really serve us, either in terms of leading our own lives or indeed leading others. But at the moment, we see a lot of fear in business, in my experience, whether it's because of, recent pandemic issues, or fear of one's job, or what the future holds, or fear of, are people leaving, And the trouble is, if we allow ourselves to be driven by fear, it drives us in a bit of a spiral down. But the good news is that we always have a choice. And that choice is to be driven by love instead. And how love shows up in a leadership sense, particularly in business, is that we see the world not as a place of scarcity, but as a place of possibility and opportunity. And instead of focusing on ourselves as an individual, we think about others. We're in service of others. Instead of ego, we allow ourselves to be led by humble confidence. And humble confidence is, what I mean by that is, yes, we have humility to listen to others who help figure out the challenges we're facing, but also we are resolute in terms of where we're going, what's really important to us, and we have that commitment that we share with others. So they too, if they believe that as well, can help us move to where we want to be. So we always have a choice. And the thing that links fear and love is courage. Courage cannot exist without fear, but courage can only be sustained by love. And we have that choice.
Mm-hmm. Yes. The whole fear conversation is top of mind for all of us. Every person in the world has been impacted by something that was incredibly terrifying when we didn't understand what was going on. And I'm sure that's something that you address with audiences that you speak to. And I know it's something you talk about in your book. Why is it, the subtitle of your book is How to Create Extraordinary Opportunities by Handing Over Control. Now, those three words, handing over control, send people into how can I give up control? That's the one thing I know it ties to ego and things that you just said. So talk to us about this angle that you're coming at leadership from. By when we let go and we hand over control, that's the ultimate.
Yeah. Let me start with explaining the metaphor of leading from the jump seat just very quickly. It comes from an experience I had back in 2002 when I was in the Royal Air Force. I did a number of things, but one of my roles was to train and check other pilots. And I'd just been on this trip with a very promising young chap, Callum, who had recently completed his training to move from being a co-pilot or a first officer over to being a captain. And we flew large passenger jets. And the last check was for me to accompany him as we flew from the UK over to Washington, Dulles, and then on to San Francisco. And he flew into San Francisco and we landed and taxied in and shut down. And it's with great pleasure I turned to him and I said, Callum, great job. I'm delighted to say you're fully signed up now. You're certified as a captain, qualified to fly this aircraft anywhere in the world. We'll stay here the night, but tomorrow we've got a full passenger load going back to Washington. You'll have your own crew. I'll be down the back with the other passengers, doing some paperwork. And it was a great moment he'd been working hard for this. So it's wonderful to see. The next morning we arrived at the airport and Callum and his crew were doing their pre-flight preparation. He came to me, he asked me if I would go and sit on the jump seat for the taxi out of San Fran, because San Francisco is very busy in the morning and it's not a place we went to regularly. And he wanted another experienced pair of eyes looking out for other aircraft and to make sure we went the right way and all the rest of it. I thought at the time this was very courageous because he'd just got me off his back, but he was in service of safety of the aircraft and it was a good call. And the jump seat where he wanted me to sit was on the flight deck, as it is on most large aircraft. You have the two pilot seats and then immediately behind you have this third seat called the jump seat. Usually it's empty, but crew members can hitch a ride home there, and that's where he wanted me to sit. And you can reach and touch the pilot, you're that close. So I strapped in and we taxied out and we got to the runway. It was our turn to get airborne. And we thundered down the runway. And just after liftoff, around about 300 or 400 feet, we had an emergency. And what I chose to do in the next 2 seconds would dictate whether the 140 people on board would survive or not.
Wow.
And the thing is, I did absolutely nothing. I sat there with my hands in my lap, perfectly calm, because I knew that Callum could sort it out. And here's the thing, in that moment, I didn't need to be a leader. I needed to be a great follower. I needed Callum to sense that I had his back, that I knew that he could sort this out and he could be what he needed to be in that moment as the captain of the aeroplane. And this coined the phrase really, leading from the jump seat, because, you know, at some time it's inevitable. We will hand over control. You know, it's inevitable. As a CEO, we will retire at some stage, or we move on from being the team leader. Or as a parent, our kids grow up and move out and start to lead their own lives. So it is inevitable. Leading from the jump seat is all about recognizing that inevitability and preparing others by lifting them up and preparing them to lead themselves so they can carry forward those things that are really important to you when you are no longer there, you know? And I think it's the greatest form of leadership, because it's not about retaining or growing your own power. It's about empowering others. And that's the joy that you feel when, well, in my situation, I saw Callum handling that emergency and take us all on safely to Washington Dulles that day.
For those of us who, and that I speak, I think for just about everybody who are not pilots, who have not been trained to fly an airplane, let alone one of these enormous aircrafts that carry 140 passengers. And I, pre-pandemic, flew quite a bit. I've flown some over the last 18 months, but certainly not to the degree that I was. And we just get on and assume everything's going to be fine. You know, that
it is mostly, you know.
And it is, right? And it is. And I there's so many takeaways from that story. I got to thinking about going back to parents. I'm currently helping both of my parents. My mother came down. My mother got COVID over the summer, and even though she was fully vaccinated, she got a breakthrough case, and she's immunocompromised, and she has Parkinson's. And I was concerned about how long it was taking her to recover. Thankfully, she's okay. But as it turns out, I'm living with my parents again. This was not in the plan. And I'm seeing this dynamic of how, you know, they raised me and my brother to be independent and did a great job. And then, as we were talking about in pre-chat, Peter, you know, you and I both are parents, and we raised our respective children to become fully functioning adults, and they're out in the world doing great things. And at some point, it's interesting because I'm experiencing a dynamic where now I am leading my parents in their lives as they are navigating this new normal for themselves, as, you know, elderly. And it's not something that we talk a lot about in many first world cultures, because we're so focused on the middle of life, right? The youth and then the middle of life. But as people are living longer lives, you know, one of the things that I've had to adjust in myself is I need to give them as much control as possible, so they still feel like they haven't been reduced to babies, right? So this leading from the jump seat metaphor really applies to so many different situations, which makes it brilliant, a brilliant read. Team, there'll be a link to get Peter's book in his show notes at pyppodcast.com once this episode has aired. And I encourage you to get it and think about it. Even if you're not working in a corporation, if you're running a solopreneurship, or maybe you have a small business, how are you allowing other people to help you, you know, to be in Callum's situation, right? Where you let Callum do Callum. Absolutely. And you sit back and keep your hands in your lap.
And if I may, Mary Lou, just building on what you just said here, in the book, I take the metaphor a bit further, because in different aspects of our life, we're at different stages. And these stages, I break it down into 4. I talk about learning to fly, flying, teaching others to fly, and then leading from the jump seat. So very quickly, learning to fly is when we're trying to figure out ourselves what really is important to us, what really matters. You know, for me, I mentioned when I went to university, I figured out that, first of all, I didn't want to be a burden to others. I wanted to be able to support my family. I also figured out something else that was really important to me was mutual respect. And these are the sorts of things that we need to figure out when we're learning how to fly. But then perhaps we leave university and we go and do great work for a company and we're in flow. And that's when we're flying. That's the next stage. And we're doing great work. But then if we continue doing great work, we will likely get promoted. And we end up with a team who's doing that great work and we're taking care of them. And that's when we hit the stage of teaching others to fly, because then we're more in the business of helping our team to thrive and to lift them up so they can do better. But then finally, we'll get to the stage of leading from the jump seat, when we've taken a big firm step back and others are taking forward what's really important to us. And so you can see this applies whether we're talking about business or family life with our children. But here's the interesting aspect. We can be at different stages in different areas of our life. So, for example, I've reconnected with a great leader and friend after 20 years. He was a very senior military commander in the British Royal Marines. And he was no doubt a jump seat leader. You know, I've referenced him in the book because he was one of the most superb leaders I've ever come across and had the privilege to work with. But now he's retired and he's trying to figure out what's next. And so he's gone back down to learning how to fly again, how to relate to his new context. And it's the same for all of us. We can be teaching others to fly or even leading from the jump seat in our main job, but perhaps we're learning scuba diving or mountaineering or something else, and we're down at the level of learning how to fly again. So this how-to book gives us guidance wherever we are in those stages and whatever we're doing in life. And I think it's a really great exercise to reflect ourselves where we are in different parts of our life and how we can use the ideas I've shared in the book to progress and do better.
Yes, it's a fabulous framework. And I love that you emphasize the fluidity of the stages, that it's not a linear progression. You can be in one place, but you can also be in another simultaneously. Yeah. And that, I think that reflects the reality of life for a lot of people. And yet, for whatever reason, I think many people, myself included, fall into the trap of thinking it has to be if this, then that kind of a progression. And it's not that way. You know, I'm thinking about a lot of different applications to those metaphors that stem from leading from the jump seat. And if you don't mind, I would love for you to talk about, I think that people who choose to write books are leading. You had a message to share. You had stories that you wanted to impart. You have a framework that is useful. Could you take us inside your journey becoming the author of this book, totally, Peter? And you know, there are a lot of people who, again, listening to this conversation and also just out in the world, who say, oh yeah, someday I want to write a book, and they have something worthwhile sharing, but they stop themselves. So maybe you could, through your story, inspire people to take that leap.
Sure. Well, first of all, I've been hugely fortunate in the different experiences I've had in my life. You know, 25 years or so in the Royal Air Force, a pilot, as a force commander during combat situations. I've been to 93 countries. I've worked with leadership teams of some of the biggest companies in the world. And it's been a wonderful privilege. And one of the big things I've learned is that regardless of our culture, background, nationality, or whatever, there's so much more that brings us together than that separates us and keeps us apart. So I really wanted to put down what I've learned about leadership, not from the place of I always got it right, because as you read in the book, quite often I didn't. But what I've learned along the way, and to put some thought to that and put a structure to it, so it's useful to other people. So the book has got a lot of stories from my background, perhaps facing emergencies on aeroplanes, you know, time when I was faced with crash landing an aircraft with 140 people on board. That focused your attention a little bit. Or leading people in a combat situation, flying aircraft which were totally unarmed and undefended, but that was our job. So the reason of mentioning the military or the emergency type situations is that when we're at the extreme of human existence, when our lives are on the line, then all the clutter falls away and you have the opportunity to really understand what drives people forward. It's a remarkable thing to see people who are willing to put themselves in harm's way, to put their lives on the line in service of a greater cause, or in service of people that wear a similar uniform to them, but they've never met, but are depending on them. So I wanted to bring all this together and show how it relates not just to those situations, but gives us some clarity in business, but also in life as a parent, which I believe is one of the biggest leadership challenges that many of us face. So that was the motivation behind it. But then I thought, well, this book is all about lifting others up. And so I decided to use that notion to actually write the book. So rather than going down the traditional publishing route, I chose to bring together a number of people who I know who are brilliant people, and give them the opportunity to stretch themselves a little bit to support me writing this book. So, for example, Jeff Baron springs to mind, who lives not far from you, Mary Lou, over in New York. And he is an opera singer of some renown. But he came onto my team, and I asked him, each chapter that I wrote, I asked him to read it through the lens of his 20 years experience of connecting with audiences in opera houses and the emotion that he generates when he sings, and help refine my storytelling. I chose editors, copy editors, who have got their own independent businesses and who perhaps hadn't, well, in some cases hadn't worked on a book like this before, to give them the opportunity to extend themselves a bit. And that was a joy. The book design cover has been designed by a guy, Carve, who does Broadway posters and the likes, and he's brilliant. So the book was putting into practice what I've written about, or at least I've tried to do that. And as such, it's been a great experience. It really has.
It's halftime here at the Play Your Position podcast, and we've got ourselves a great game. While you're up grabbing another snack and topping off your favorite beverage, make sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss another play. PYP is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever great podcasts can be found. Now, let's get back to the game.
It's wonderful. I've never heard an author talk about bringing together people like you did as part of the process. So I love that you took us inside your creative process, and the end result is clearly magnificent, and it has so much value, because there are some timeless messages in it. Doesn't matter, someone could read this in 50 years and it's still relevant.
Well, thank you.
And it's applicable to what so many of us are going through right now. As you spoke about your friend, your mentor from the Royal Marines, who is now looking at his life and saying, what next? I think that's happening. Multiply that by millions of people are questioning where they've been and where they want to go now. I was just on a call yesterday in one of my mastermind groups, and one of the women there, she's coming out of some times, and she's ready for something else. And boy, it's common.
Yeah, and if I can pick up on that, because it links back to the humble confidence piece we spoke about earlier, Mary Lou. Humble confidence is everything. Because if you have humble confidence, first of all, you're sourcing yourself from a place of love, not fear, from a place of possibility, not scarcity. But also, what gives you the humble confidence to move forward is understanding what's really important to you, what really matters in life. And that is so important when we're facing the unknown, whether that's in our own life or trying to lead a team or a business into the future. When we're facing the unknown and we don't necessarily have the answers, having the handrail of what we know is really important to us, that is what we need to guide ourselves and others around us forward. But in order to do that, we need to have that humble confidence, because it means then we're able to put up our hand and say, look, I don't have all the answers, but that's okay, because I know where we're going. I know why it's so important to me and to us, and I'm going to prevail anyway. And are you with me? And for many of us in business or in teams, it's part of letting go of control as well, because quite often we've been promoted, say, in a team because we have the answer to problems that come up. But the big transition, the big opportunity is to step into that space where we're comfortable leading when we don't know the answer. And we're just holding the space for others around us, be it our formal team at work or in our own personal lives, our friends and family, holding that space where they can step in and help us figure it out. And when we do that, we're no longer the constriction in the pipe. You know, if we're the person who's got to have the answer all the time because we're the senior person, or it's our own life we're talking about, so we've got to have the answer, you know, because that's what leading's all about, we think, then we limit ourselves. We are the constriction. But if we get comfortable holding that space, being clear on where we want to go without necessarily knowing how we're going to get there, and inviting others in to help us figure it out, then we are no longer that constriction, and we accelerate both in our own life, but also as a team or an organization.
Mm-hmm. That space you speak of is one of the richest spaces to be in, and yet it's the hardest space to be in.
Well, it is.
We're so trained and conditioned from schooling, from culture, to always have it together, to always know what's next. And the older I get, the more I realize the less we really do know what's next.
Yes, absolutely. And being comfortable with that is the key. And in order to be comfortable, we've got to suppress that fear and the ego that goes with it, you know, and the way to do that is to harness humble confidence. The way to harness humble confidence is being clear on what's really important to us, because that gives us that guide, that handrail that we need.
So that echoes the work. You know, you worked with Simon Sinek. Find Your Whys is a runaway global bestseller because that message of knowing why are you doing what you're doing resonates with just so many people. Could you talk a little bit about what was it like to work with him, and how did that experience help shape you into the leader you are now?
Well, I think what I'd say about the experience of working with Simon was that there was a moment when I first met him, actually, where he extended the greatest trust that perhaps I've ever experienced. And that is, it was fairly early on with Start With Why, his first book. He asked me to help take his message around the world. And at that stage, he'd never heard me speak, actually. And he had, even at that stage, quite a brand and a reputation. So it was a huge act of trust. And it actually links to what I've written about in this book, you know, about lifting others up and giving people the space so they can lead. So I'll be forever grateful to Simon for that. And it was a wonderful experience. But then when I stepped away from Simon a couple of years ago to really start to go a bit deeper into ideas which have resulted in this latest book of Leading from the Jump Seat, I wanted to go beyond where I'd been before, because I wanted to get back to real deep fundamentals. And in this current book, I talk about, well, we've already mentioned it, what's really important to you. But I help us to figure that out. Because, well, for example, for many of us, family is really important. A couple of years ago, I had a phone call from my wife, Claire, who'd been involved in a car accident. And I dropped everything and went to her aid. Thankfully, she was fine. But, you know, there was nothing that would have got in my way to going and being with my wife. And it's that internal fire that really interested me, because it helps you to overcome, well, first of all, to step into the unknown, It gives you that courage to step into the unknown and that fire to keep you going. And I thought, right, well, if we can figure out what else really matters to us to the same sort of level or extent, then that's a really powerful energy source to harness. And so where I am now with this book goes beyond what I previously wrote with Simon and David Mead, who also co-authored Find Your Why. And it was just a joy to go deeper and to think a little bit more about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, deep is a good place to be. It's exciting. It's
Scary.
I love. It is scary. It is absolutely scary. Well, thank you for sharing that story. Again, you're speaking to how we need each other to move forward. I was born and raised in a country that values independence and the cowboy mythos, where you are the Lone Ranger, right? Very powerful mythology here in America. And that is a mythology that I'm seeing getting dismantled year by year as we have become a global community, not just an American community. You talked earlier about the invasion of the Falkland Islands and, witnessing. I think we're at such a rich time right now where there's an opportunity to create something spectacular. The way we think about the world, the way we think about each other, the way we think about communities and leadership. Because when your life is literally on the line because an unknown disease has entered the population, I don't think anything drives you down into that place of what really matters to me than that. When that's that edge of fear, right? We need the fear to sometimes kick us a little bit, to wake us up and say, ooh, maybe you really aren't meant to be doing this anymore, or maybe you need to pay more attention to this over here, or maybe you need to say I love you more than you have. I mean, it could be a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly has given people the opportunity, or at least those of us who've chosen to reflect on what's really important to us. And I think as well, just picking up on what you're saying there, Mary Lou, I think there's what I find is a really helpful distinction that I bring in the book is the difference between a position and a stand. We've seen passions arise in communities for a variety of reasons in the last couple of years. And this is where I think the idea of a position versus stand really helps. A position is against something. And it's quite easy to identify that fire that ignites when we feel very, very strongly against something. But a stand is for something. And that's very different. So the example I use is we've got a narrow country lane by where we live into our village. And there's only enough width in that road for one car to pass at a time. And sometimes you'll have two cars, one coming each way, and they meet bumper to bumper or fender to fender. And they each take up a position against the other. And that position looks like, no, you back up. My journey is more important than yours, or you were going too fast. Yeah, we've all been there. And what happens is that the positions become more and more entrenched as they become stronger against one another. But then occasionally in that situation where the two cars meet fender to fender, one of them will reverse back up to a passing place because that driver has got a stand. And that stand is for being courteous on the road. But here's the interesting thing. The other person who had that position, that immediately dissolves as they can carry on their journey, because a position can only exist if there is a counter position. But the thing about a stand is that can exist without anything or anyone else. It's just what you stand for. And in my example of the person who's reversed back up to the passing place, what happens is their stand becomes stronger. It becomes reinforced. And it's a generative energy. Whereas that other person who's gone in their way, who may have adopted a position against, that position has dissolved, and so too has any energy that's gone with it. So I think as we look at the world, at what's going on and the challenges that we face personally in business or whatever in our communities, it's really very, very valuable to remind ourselves of the power of a stand for something rather than, well, a position against. Because when you have a stand for something, it opens up way more possibilities and opportunities than any position could ever do.
That's a beautiful distinction. I've never heard it's described that way. And as you're talking about, I'm like, in my title, my podcast is Play Your Position, which is, I never saw it as being against something the way you're describing. I see, it's gorgeous, gorgeous distinction between being against something versus standing for something else.
Can I tell you a quick story of how that plays out in reality?
Please.
So it goes back some years now, and my son just got to his 18th birthday. And here over in the UK at 18, you are legally allowed to buy a big motorcycle, big engine motorcycle. Mm-hmm. And Patrick, he wanted to have one of those. He wanted a Suzuki Bandit. A Suzuki Bandit can go from 0 to 60 miles an hour in around 3.5 seconds and tops out at around about 130 miles an hour. Oof. And we have very narrow lanes around our home where we live in the countryside. And in fact, one of Patrick's friends, not very long before that, had almost been killed on his motorbike. So my initial immediate reaction as a parent was, no way are you getting that. Yeah, no way. And looking back, I started to take up a position against Patrick getting that bike. But the thing is, if I'd pursued that, it would have been like the two cars meeting fender to fender on the narrow street. You know, Patrick would equally have got into a position against me, you know, because he wanted to move forward with getting that bike. But instead, I approached the situation from a place of a stand, which was, what am I a stand for? Well, I'm a stand for the safety of my family, and in this case, of Patrick. And so I went to him, I said, Patrick, right, about this motorcycle, I'll tell you what, we'll get one. There's one that's available, secondhand, beautiful white bike in yellow. We'll get it and we'll put it in our garden shed. And then we'll go and do the training, both you and I, because I can't ride a motorcycle. So let's both do the training together. But there's one other condition, and that is, as soon as we passed our test, we will both go on and do what's called in this country the Advanced Rider Certificate. And immediately, you know, Patrick thought, well, at 18, to be an advanced rider, that sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? So off we went. We started this training, and it went really well, and it opened up other possibilities or opportunities. Our relationship deepened. We shared something. It was wonderful. And halfway through this training, he came to me and said, you know what? He said, I've been doing the sums on this, he said, and once I've passed the training, by the time I've paid for the insurance for this big, powerful motorcycle, I'm not going to be able to afford to go anywhere, he said. So, you know what? If you don't mind, I'm not going to carry on with the bike training. I'm going to get a car instead. And that's what he did. So, you know, we have a choice always. Position and stand links to fear and love. You know, I could have gone with a position which would have been sourced from a fear of my son losing his life or being badly injured. But instead, I chose to be led by love, a love for my son being safe and the possibility of him being able to, you know, enjoy his life with his friends and have his own mode of transportation, etc. And new possibilities emerged because of it, you know. So that's a practical, real life example of how we can use a stand instead of a position.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing that story. It's phenomenal to think about our choices in situations like that. And you're right, you could have gone the opposite. And who knows how that would have turned out. So you really modeled for us the power of leading from a place of love versus fear. And one of the things here those of us who love American football, Peter, one of the things we love is when our team scores the game-winning touchdown. So if you'll indulge me here, I'm going to put you in the red zone. There are less than 30 seconds left on the clock.
Yep.
You are down. Your team is down by 4 points. So it's now or never. Tell us a story about a time when you ran the ball into the end zone for that game-winning touchdown.
When I ran the ball, good heavens. Looking back, well, I'll tell you one, and it's something I didn't realize until much later in life, and it's shared in the book. When I was a squadron commander, which was a squadron is the fighting unit of the Royal Air Force, I led a couple hundred people, and I focused on lifting people up in my organization so they could become the leaders in the future. And it's only a couple of years ago, I left the Air Force back in 2007. It's only a couple of years ago when I met up with people who used to be junior officers on my squadron that I got to discover that 7 of them, during my 2.5 years of tenure, 7 of them had all subsequently been promoted and had run squadrons of their own. That's my touchdown, because was it all down to me? No, not a bit of it. They had great capability, but I like to think I gave them the space. I helped lift them up so as they could grow and be the leaders that they were destined to be. That's my touchdown.
Love it. And that is, I think about giving others the space to play their positions, right? To do what they need to do, so then in turn, they experience what that feels like. And they ideally will then give others the space that they need and deserve. The worst thing that can happen in life is when you find yourself boxed into a place where you're being micromanaged, when you feel like there's no room to even try to make a mistake. We learn best by making mistakes, by fumbling our balls, right? By throwing that interception. That's when we learn. Now, in a situation like you were in as a pilot, there's not a whole lot of room for error because you have lives on the line. However, things do happen, and being able to recognize, hey, I know these guys got this, and not jump in to try to take over, which can. I remember a story. I remember a time I was probably 8. My brother was 6, and he was on a dock. He was on the end of a dock, and he was fishing, and he caught. You could tell it was a bass. It was a big bass, and the rod was bending, right. And he was excited. And I, as the big sister, thought, "Oh, I can help him." So I literally jumped next to him and grabbed the rod, and in doing so, the fish got off the lure. I never forgot. Yeah. I felt so embarrassed. I felt so badly that I had done that. He was so mad at me, and rightfully so. I had no business jumping in and trying to help him land this fish, and never forgot that. I mean, it was one of those, as a child can understand, but I got the message that, let other people fight their fights, lead their lives. Oh man.
Yeah. Absolutely. And sometimes, just like Callum in my, because when we do jump in, even when we see things going wrong and there's a huge temptation to jump in then, the danger is we prick their balloon of confidence. And that can take weeks, months, or forever to be reinflated again. So, this is something I try. I don't always get it right. And by the way, it's not about getting it right all the time. It's about your intention, where you're sourcing yourself from, and the trend over time. We all make mistakes as human beings, but it's our intention that's so important. And there will be moments when we're working with people or just our kids or our siblings where a situation occurs and we have the opportunity to either have that situation spiral down or to have it spiral up in terms of that person's development, their own leadership, and their own future and possibilities they see. So I always try to look for the opportunity no matter how bad it is, to see if we can help that person spiral up.
Yep. I can't agree more. It's the way, it's the way. It's not, but it's worth it. It's worth it. So for people listening who'd like to connect with you, Peter, to learn more about you, where do you hang out online and where can they get your book? Obviously, I'll have a link to it, but, go ahead, promote yourself.
Sure. Well, well, my website is very simple. It's leadingfromthejumpseat.com, and you'll find videos of me talking about ideas from the book and other resources there. And the book is available worldwide on Amazon and lots of other retailers in print form, ebook, and also audiobook. So you should be able to get it wherever you are. And I'd be delighted, anybody who reads the book, I'd be delighted to hear any feedback you have and if it's helped you or indeed if it hasn't. But I'd love to hear from you.
Of course. Yes. So team, again, the links to Peter's website to buy his book will be on his show notes page at pyppodcast.com. And you can also read more about him there. And then I say, go check out his website. He's got some great videos and it's a beautiful website. Just if you're into user experience and the design of websites, it's absolutely gorgeous. So nice job on that.
Brilliant. I'll pass that on to the folks who designed it for me because they're great.
Yeah. So as we wrap things up today, Peter, I always ask my guests to tell us who your team is. Now, I know being from the UK, your team may be one that my American audience isn't familiar with, and that's okay. So is there a team that you enjoy going, getting a pint at the local pub and cheering on?
Oh, I thought you meant my own team, but you're talking about football.
A sports team.
Do you know? I'm kind of embarrassed to say in this context that I don't have a team as such. But what I will say is this: I am a wreck whenever I'm watching any game. Whether it's a team game, whether it's the Olympics is a total crash zone for me because I really get filled up when I see people excelling, being extraordinary. I might not know them from Adam or Eve, but if I see people, whether it's crossing the line, making the touchdown, scoring the try, where they've prevailed over challenges in front of them and have trained hard and sacrificed so much, in that moment of success, I'm right there with them, whatever game it is. And, well, if you were sitting alongside me, Mary Lou, you'd find that I wouldn't be saying much because I can't get the words out. So that's what inspires me. And I would just like, if I may, to bring another metaphor that goes directly to American football, and that is the notion of problem, challenge, and opportunity. When we're standing, if we're a part of an American football team, we're standing there and we can see the opposing defense side and the whistle hasn't gone yet, but we can see that opposing side and it's static. That's the problem. Yeah. But then the whistle goes, and should we choose, we charge and we take on that problem. And when it becomes dynamic, that's when it's a challenge and we head down and we charge. And in so doing, we will likely break through that line. And we can see the touchdown in front of us. And that's when our challenge turns into opportunity. So we have a choice. We can look at problems that we're facing in the world, in our own lives, in business, and it's just static. Or we can put our head down, we can charge and turn that problem into a challenge. And then the likelihood is we're going to break through the line and opportunities are going to open up in front of us and we will get to that touchdown zone.
Well, I can't think of a better way to wrap up this phenomenal conversation today than that. Thank you, Peter, so much for giving me and Team PYP your time, your insights about leading from a place of love versus fear, leading from the jump seat, handing over control, all the things that we discussed today. It's been an absolute joy.
My pleasure, Mary Lou. Thanks for having me on.
Hey team, Mary Lou here. Who's number one in football changes from year to year. Fashion trends come and go, same with musical tastes. But leadership skills, they never go out of style. In fact, these days, leadership is an essential survival skill for a world that demands more from us than ever before. To succeed these days, you need to know how to show up for yourself so that you can then do the work you love with people you like the way you want. The Play Your Position Leadership Playbook helps you do this, and it's free. Go to pyppodcast.com to download your copy today. If being more successful this year, next year, in the 21st century is on your to-do list, get your copy of the Play Your Position Leadership Playbook now. pyppodcast.com. It's at the top of the page. You can't miss it. That's pyppodcast.com, and start being more of the leader you are meant to be today. This podcast was produced by Daniel Romeros. Show notes for this episode can be found over at pyppodcast.com. I'm Mary Lou Kaiser. Thanks for listening.
Here at the Play Your Position podcast, we believe that the road to self-mastery and a life well lived starts with answering the call to leadership. That's when the fun really begins. Send this episode to any friends who might need to hear the inspiration and ideas you heard today. And feel free to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform.